Now, recently, we launched our Voice of the Advisor survey. And in this survey, the reason it was our third year in market, and again, the reason we do it is because, as you mentioned, CGI, we do sell products to the financial industry, particularly to the wealth management industry. And so advisors use our products, but we're not always aware of how they feel, of what their lives are like. Like I have frontline experience, and that was one of the reasons that I moved over. But not everyone in the firm who works on the products does. And so we decided that we wanted to hear from advisors and, like, what are your takes? How do you feel about your business? Where do you see it heading? And this year we had a focus on digitization, essentially. And, how do you feel about your business in terms of technology? How much technology you feel you have? If you feel you have too little technology, how well you're leveraging it? And, surprisingly, some of the themes were recurring from previous years, such as, we want integration. What I wasn't surprised by, but was new this year, was that the number one priority for advisors was the client experience. Right. They're like, we want to provide the best client experience that we can to retain, I should say, and also to acquire new clients, because they want their clients to be saying positive things. Now, when we speak about that, when we speak about this digital age and what's happening, and you've mentioned the fact that there is this sort of notion that most of the world is going towards digital, and always, particularly with the Zoomers, are always on social media, but that's not really fully reality. So can you tell me a bit about your perspective on this and how you feel clients can achieve this when it comes to providing the best experience that they possibly can?
Sure. So I think a couple points. First of all, I think it's important to start by understanding, where do expectations come from? Where do expectations come from digital experience? Well, they come from the best digital experiences out there, right? So people, you mentioned, kind of Amazon and the ability to tailor and customize the content we're getting. Not just Amazon. If you are subscribing to the New York Times or the Globe and Mail, they're moving towards a similar platform where they customize what you see based on your preferences, your interests, so they're able to provide a tailored solution. So instant, what we want, when we want it, that's what customers expect. And then they sometimes say, well, okay, how come I'm not getting that from my financial institution? How come I'm not getting that from, my financial advisor? And there are reasons. It may be related to technology. It may be related to regulation. Customers don't care, right? Same thing when it comes to the one-to-one experience. So people's perspectives are shaped by the very best customer experiences, whether it be walking to a Four Seasons or a Starbucks, right? Like, people's expectations are shaped by not the worst experiences they get. They're shaped by the best experiences they get. That's their frame of reference.
Absolutely. And so it goes back to creating an experience that'll be memorable, particularly your first one. And so when I think about the industry and I think about my time there and about all the hurdles that you have to jump through to set up an account, for instance, right? So if it took you a week to open up an account or longer, because sometimes there were other circumstances, the client's not aware of that, and they shouldn't have to be, and they shouldn't have to care, right? It's like, okay, like I signed off on the documents, I gave you this over a week ago, like, what's going on? When is this stuff going to get moved over? And I feel like we were speaking about AI and ML and technology earlier, but this is an area where you can utilize those technologies in order to create a more streamlined process.
So you're absolutely right. So account opening, incredibly painful. And I've had financial advisors who, we had a period of time in about 2015, 2016, when the view was, okay, robo-advisors are going to be a huge challenge to every financial advisor, every financial institution. That was kind of the peak of the excitement. Wealthsimple was launched in 2014. And one of the things that led to that view was I had advisors say I opened a Wealthsimple account and I was just blown away by how quick, how simple, how intuitive it was. And I compare that to my experience. And to your point, that's the first experience people have. And that's what they remember. That shapes the recollection. So we need to find a way to simplify it. And, I had advisors, actually, I had a conversation with an advisor say, look, I've had to cut the account minimum, because my assistant will spend 10 hours opening an account. How is that possible? So an advisor said, look, I can't afford. I'd love to take on some smaller clients. I've got some capacity. But when my assistant says, look, it takes me 10 hours, right? Like, that's tough.
That's extremely tough. Oh my goodness, yes. Well, I will say that I have seen movement with account opening applications now. This is obviously particularly with the big six, because they can afford to utilize that type of technology. But I believe everyone is doing their best to change this, where they're having what are called My Client Profiles, essentially, where all the client information is now gathered, and then you can streamline the opening. But it can still be difficult, particularly because there are still manual processes in there, and that may take a bit of time to overcome.
But let's go beyond just that initial painful account opening process. One of the things that we know correlates with long-term financial success is having a financial plan, and then updating that financial plan on an ongoing basis, just not doing it originally, but updating it. And I've had conversations with advisors who say, when I talk to a client, they say up front, one of the things that we know, this is a clear, direct drive outcome of you doing well. And so right up front, if you aren't prepared to invest the time up front to do this and agree that we're going to update it, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to work with you, right? That's a deal breaker.
Right.
Hard to say, but by the way, some clients will say, okay, forget it in that case. But most clients will say, all right, if that's what it's going to take for me to succeed, I'm going to take guidance from you. And clients will respect that. Now, that being said, okay, easy to say. Then you get into the actual process of collecting the data, right, putting it all together, assembling it, analyzing it, the report. That can be incredibly painful today. That's one of the things that I believe Conquest Financial Planning, they're not the only one. There are other players as well, are looking to do the streamline. That's one of I think, the real exciting areas among many others, where AI and technology can really lead to better outcomes for clients and for advisors by taking something that's slow, hard, cumbersome right now and really streamlining the process.
I agree with you. And it's very interesting that you say that. So I recently hosted a webinar for our Voice of the Advisor report that's coming out. And I had an advisor from the US, from Alabama, who came on and shared his story. And he was telling us that before he does anything, he spends 2 to 3 meetings up front before any money is invested on the financial planning portion of it, because he wants to really get to know the client. He wants to know their goals, their aspirations. He wants them to feel comfortable. And so this is the way that he establishes trust. And for those that are interested in the webinar, we'll throw a link to it in the description. But that conversation was very eye-opening, because we're sort of, obviously there's meetings where the client and the advisor get to know each other, but there's usually always let's get these accounts open, let's get the money transferred over, let's just see how we want to invest it. And then the way he described it, he essentially goes through this entire process that can take a while, multiple meetings, just to establish that trust and really get to know his clients, and for them to feel comfortable and to have a plan for what they want to do before they act on anything.
So one of the things that when I talk to the most successful advisors, many of them share that view. There are a bunch of benefits to that. Obviously, as you say, you're building trust. You're getting the clients talking. So one of the things we know, there is very clear data that Many advisors believe that they impress potential clients by talking about their team, their background, their performance, their track record, all of those things. When you're meeting with a prospective client one-to-one, exactly the opposite is true. The data is absolutely clear. The more time you spend getting a potential client talking, by the way, that's true of client meetings as well, but let's deal with prospects. The more time you get a potential client talking, at the end of the meeting, the smarter they think you are, the more impressed they are, right? The more they think you care, and the more predisposed they are. In a different context, I talked to students about some research that was done at Ohio State, where you had two students graduate, or had one student applying, graduating from university, applying for a job, let's call it IBM, same student, same role, same resume, applying, meeting with two different recruiters from the same company. And in one case, half an hour, spent all of the time talking about what most students do, why they were qualified for this job. In the other case, spent half the time roughly asking questions, good questions. Didn't say, what does IBM do? But good questions. Who got the job? Who got the offer? In every case, it was the second case where he was asking questions, engaging the interviewer. And so the same principle applies here. The more time you spend engaging with the prospect, getting them to talk, the more likely they are to say, you know what, I want to learn more. I want to learn more about who you are, what you do, how you can help me.
It's very true. And that, again, goes back to that trust building and just, I suppose, showing empathy, right? Where you're trying to genuinely get an idea of who this person is that's sitting in front of you, instead of just being interested in their assets, but being interested in the individual and showcasing that. I feel that's very important.
Right.
And the best clients realize, the best advisors realize that. And I'm sure the clients feel that from their advisor, right? Like, okay, this person treats me like a real individual.
Absolutely. So it's demonstrating interest, empathy. One more thing. There is neuroscience that when we talk, it triggers parts of the brain for most people. There are exceptions, but for most people, that actually are pleasurable. So at an unconscious level, after a meeting, when you spent the whole meeting listening, not nearly as pleasurable an experience as one where you got to spend a lot of time talking.
It's true. I suppose we do like to share our opinions, and you do get a bit of a dopamine hit from doing that. That's really fascinating. Now, some of the other things that I want to discuss from our survey, from the results that came in, when it comes to technology, it seems as though most advisors do feel like they have the technology, and that's not surprising because pretty much every firm is constantly just doing new launches, right? Here's more, and here's more. I feel where the disconnect, and the research did show this, is them actually understanding the benefit of the technology and it being rolled out in a way where it's intuitive and it's very easily implemented into their book of business.
Yeah, this is tough, right? It's hard. One of the hardest things to do. And really where we need to go is basically being in an on-demand situation. So we don't have to become experts on technology as advisors or as consumers, but it's there when we need it. So let me draw a parallel. I was at a conference around financial planning, and one of the speakers, a U.S. expert on financial planning, and he said, financial literacy training has been a colossal bust. We've had millions of hours, millions of dollars spent on educating customers about financial literacy. For the most cases, made zero impact. So the research shows that you can give customers 24 hours of training on financial literacy, which is a lot of training. If it's not used within the next 6 months, zero impact. So they retain nothing out of that 6 months later. So it says where we need to go is two things. One, we need to create a default set of behaviors so that customers are better off if they just follow the default, here's what you do if you don't do anything else, kind of course of action. Maybe we can talk about that later. But the other thing is having just-in-time training. So somebody's about to buy a second home in Costa Rica, right? There are some big ramifications. So you don't need to know anything at all about buying a second home in Costa Rica unless you're buying a second home in Costa Rica. And then when you do, that's when you need to know a lot about tax consequences, financial planning consequences, accounting consequences, currency issues. And so what you need to do is to be able to access everything you need to know at that moment in time.
That makes sense. And you mentioned neuroscience earlier, and this sounds like a neuroplasticity exercise. And I agree, because sometimes the industries get very excited about providing all this education, and it is for good reason, right? They of course want clients to be aware, but it is also about capacity of the clients and how much they can take, and the fact that if you do learn something and then you don't utilize it, you're bound to lose it. And that's why they say practice makes perfect, right?
I will make one exception, and that is I do think that there's a gap in terms of financial education at a very young age, like starting in high school. And I think that's where there's already some things happening, but I do think we could do more in terms of things like credit card debt, for example, which is the first experience sometimes that young folks have. And we all know stories or heard stories about, kid goes off to university and all of a sudden, they get a credit card and they don't understand that, you have to pay it back. There's interest. It's not like free money.
Yes.
So I do think that there is an opportunity to build a baseline of education kind of at a very young age.
Oh, I completely agree. I feel that basic financial literacy should be a part of the curriculum. Right. When I was in high school, I believe it was starting in grade 11, where we got an option to take an investments course, right. And it was just simple stocks and bonds at that right. point. But I feel that that was optional, and it shouldn't be, like things like budgeting and debt management and being aware of how interest accrues on your credit card. So you think that, oh, look, I have $1,000 on this, right. But if you don't pay that back, you're gonna end up paying a lot more than just $1,000. And I feel that, and there's been talks about like payday loan places, right. And just some people consider it fair. That's a whole other conversation. But I feel things like that should be discussed, and right. that young kids should be aware of it before they ever have to go and even try to consider those types of choices.
So let me just come back to something you talked about earlier in the context of payday loans. So payday loans, kind of have a bad rap, justifiably, right? For all the reasons. I think that it easy to get kind of onto a downward cycle, and once you get on, it's very, very hard to get off. So you'd look at that and you'd say, okay, so like people who use payday loans are being irrational, maybe in some cases. But I read an interesting research study where one of the key things that payday loans do well, maybe the only thing they do well, is they make it easy for people to actually access the loan. So coming back to that user experience compared to opening a bank account and so on. And so, I think that the more we can take friction out of the system, make it easy for people to do things like, opening a bank account, the more people are actually going to, who need it, use our conventional kind of financial products that are better suited for them rather than alternatives like payday loans, where they really only do, in my view, one thing really well, which is make it real easy, right, to apply for that loan.
I agree with that. And to your point about user experience, and this is something that, again, advisors are, of course, always focused on. And the client portal is a big area for that. And that was another area that was discussed in the survey. And it seems as though majority of firms provide user portals and clients are aware of them and using them. But it goes back to on improving those experiences, right. Because they can be very clunky and disjointed, right? And a client goes in and they might be looking for something particular and it's not there. Right. And when you're with a large firm, a full service brokerage, right. You have expectations, as right. we discussed before. Right. And if you log on and it's like plain HTML right. and there's no color and right. it just looks very boring, right. not the
Well,
best
hopefully
experience.
we've seen some movement on that and some improvement on that. But you're right. What you're describing is kind of something that wasn't wasn't uncommon that long ago. But let me come back to and loop back to something we talked about earlier, which is identifying out of pattern behavior and acting on that basis. So let's suppose that you have a client and they really have checked their balance once a month historically. And then all of a sudden, that client's gone online, checking their balance every morning, right? So as an advisor, first of all, should you know that? I think the answer is yes. Should you do something about that? I think the answer is yes. So we should be able to have a system where when there is out of pattern behavior like that, that advisors kind of have that kind of front and center that they are able then to take action. But if you don't know that, right? By the way, the client, they expect that you should know that. What do you mean? How come you don't know the fact that I've been checking my balance?
Yeah, I mean, every time I go onto Amazon, they stalk me and then they come back and say, hey, you forgot something in your cart, right? So you would expect something similar from your advisor. And I think that's a very good point. And again, all these firms and advisors are actually quite excited about this as well when it comes to AI and ML and the potential of those technologies. And firms all over want to invest. In fact, I did see a study yesterday where just in like the past few months, the number of firms that were before thinking about investing in AI versus now wanting to invest in it has jumped significantly. And I feel that to your earlier point about fast follower versus slow follower, nobody wants to be a slow follower here, right? They all want to get in and they want to ensure that they have an attractive firm because they don't want to lose their advisors either, right? Like firms' clients are the advisors in this case. And so it seems to be that there's, again, a lot of potential, a lot of use cases. But I do believe that something like the scenario that you mentioned is a small win. Like that should be pretty easy to implement where you have a perfect, a simple algorithm. They'll tell you if they hit this floor or ceiling to notify. And if someone is checking their balance on a daily basis or multiple times a day, there might be something happening there.
By the way, that pertains to many things. So you talked earlier about relationship building. I had a conversation with an advisor a few years ago, and very successful advisor, and he said, like for my top clients, for years, I'll take them out to dinner, I'll take them out golfing. It cost me a few $100s, but for a top client, that's money well spent. And they always say thank you, but it doesn't feel often that they really see that as above and beyond, but they kind of expect it, right? They know that I'm generating or the firm's generating significant revenue, so they kind of think that, this is something that's just my due. By the way, some don't even say thank you. However, so here's something that happened that was transformational. So I was at a conference and at my firm, and they did kind of a sharing of best practices, and one of the most successful advisors in my firm talked about something he began doing that was huge. Every morning, his assistant would put on his desk a list of, actually, the night before, all of the clients that had birthdays that day. And if it was a Friday, it would be that day plus Saturday and Sunday. Mm-hmm. And he would call them. And, just wanted to be on the first to wish you a happy birthday, got voicemail, left the voicemail. It says, in fact, sometimes it's better still because I don't want to necessarily talk to all of my clients all the time. Some of them are going to go on for a very long time. So I'm happy to leave a voicemail. Yeah. And he says, now if I don't do that with every client, if I've got a super successful business owner, maybe that's not a good use of their time. But for many of my clients, especially retirees, I've had retirees say, you know what? This is probably the only call. My kids are going to forget to call me today, but my advisor called me. That's such a simple thing to do. But you think about, why does his advisor's assistant have to print out the names of clients and their phone numbers and so on? Why can we not automate this, right? Such a simple thing to do.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And there's, at least during my time, there was a lot of list printing,
Right.
and there's definitely a lot of room to automate things. And again, like, to your point of why does the assistant have to bring it up, why can't the advisor just show up, log in, and have these notifications and say, hey, call this person, or, like reminders, integration with their CRM system of even like their schedule for the day, because there is a lot of administrative work. And part of the thing that really kind of was one of my pet peeves during my tenure was the administrative work, because I felt it didn't add value, right? You can be spending that time doing things that add a lot of value, but instead you're spending hours working on, whether it be some compliance stuff or administrative stuff. And we now are moving into an era where we can utilize technology to help with all of that.
Let me just, picking up on your point about the CRM comment, talk about another small example of how technology is changing rapidly. So we know, not just advisors, every salesperson hates after a call entering in the CRM, right? What did we talk about? What did the client have to say? What do I need to do next time? And we know no one likes to do this because it's cumbersome and time consuming and clunky. So I was at a talk at Rotman last night, actually, and they had founder of a company that was acquired by TELUS that's in the business of integrating voice technology. And he's got a new book out, and the title of the book is The Sound of the Future. And the invitation to the talk said, voice technology is going to transform how we interact with clients. We've heard that before, right? Everything's going to transform how we interact. But he had some examples where voice, for example, can populate going forward a CRM, right? So we don't have to enter stuff manually. We can just kind of make or with, with some technology, but in theory that that we can actually record our conversation and it can be summarized in the key points put in the CRM. So we don't actually have to do anything. It'll populate it manually. But the key thing is it'll hit the key points. So with the AI, they'll be able to synthesize and summarize so it'll be there in a useful fashion. So that's, if we're not there today, we're going to be there very soon. And that's another example of how technology is going to be able to improve the customer experience and improve advisor efficiency dramatically.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I was in a meeting just yesterday where this was being discussed about using NLP for note taking, whether it be for a client meeting, whether it be for sales individuals, because again, that is one of those things, particularly for advisors when they're meeting with their clients. Yes, they'll have a notebook out and they'll try to take notes, but they also want to make sure that they're engaged in the conversation. Right. So sometimes you're like, okay, I have to make sure I take this down, and you may not take it down. And now you don't have to worry about that because you can utilize this wonderful technology to do it for you.
And think about where that goes in terms of alerts, by the way. Mm-hmm. So, we talked earlier, somebody's had a conversation about a client wants to help their grandkids or their kids. Well, right now the advisor, how does that show up on the advisor's screen, right? There's got to be some kind of a manual process. Well, guess what? Technology, if we're not there, we're on the way there, where, you're able to automatically have the most important alerts show up on your screen for follow-up.